the shuttered Philadelphia Energy Solutions refinery in South Philadelphia. About 80 union workers have been let go, according to union sources. Ryan O'Callahan is president of USW Local 101. He says there are still dangerous chemicals on site, so the refinery should keep some union workers on past the original layoff date of August 25th.
We need trained USW workers who worked in those units to stay there. Not all of them, but there needs to be the trained operators there.
The refinery entered Chapter 11 bankruptcy last month after a fire in June caused it to close. It's been 9 months since a chemical plant near the Delaware Memorial Bridge released a flammable toxic gas that closed the bridge to traffic and impacted the lives of residents in the area. The Croda Atlas Point chemical plant says problems at the plant have been fixed, but residents aren't so sure. WHYY's Chris Parrish has more from the Delaware desk.
Croda hopes to resume making ethylene oxide within 2 months, but first it must complete required training of employees and show the state that it can start up safely. Many people fear another toxic release or major fire. They want sirens to alert residents of an incident to enhance the reverse 911 call system that only reaches some homes. State Rep Franklin Cook said prisons have sirens, so why shouldn't the plant?
We need to have a siren because my neighborhood is generational. Homes that have mothers, grandmothers, and they don't work phones, smartphones. They don't know how to work computers. I hope they're listening to their community.
Croda's Chris Barnett rejected the siren call. State officials say air quality was not adversely affected by the November release. From the Delaware desk, Chris Parrish, WHYY News.
Checking sports, Phillies hoping for a sweep of their series with the Cubs. Action getting underway at 7:05 tonight at the Park, and it's Eagles-Jaguars in Jacksonville for preseason game number 2. Kickoff at 7. This is WHYY. From NPR and WBUR, I'm Alvin Young.
I'm Jeremy Hobson. It's Here and Now. Stocks rebounded slightly this morning, one day after the Dow had its worst performance of the year. There is fear of a recession in the United States and a global economic uncertainty is there about that at this point? And do you think that it would behoove the Trump administration to remove some of that uncertainty and really sit down and hammer out a deal with China?
Absolutely. I mean, tariffs in general are a bad idea. I mean, I hope you can't find very many economists who think tariffs are a good idea, because they're not. They hurt economies. But also just the uncertainty, because what happens is businesses say, well, I don't know whether they're going to be tariffs or not, so let's just wait and see. And wait and see is the two most dangerous words in economics. When everybody decides to wait and see instead of making business decisions, everything slows down. So yes, I think the Trump administration ought to come to a deal with China, but also we need to be more predictable in our policy. We can't just, come to an agreement one week and then we're fighting again the next week. We need to have a predictability about our policy, which I think would help just as much as lowering tariffs at this stage.
Meantime, the president has been pressuring the Federal Reserve to lower rates as far as they can go. Do you think that would be a good move if the Fed did that?
No, I think that this is all about trade uncertainty. It's got nothing to do with high interest rates. There isn't a single business person in America, there isn't a single homeowner or home buyer in America who's hesitating to do a deal because interest rates are just too high. But that's just not true. The real problem here is uncertainty, and I think in many ways I'd rather the Federal Reserve get back to normal interest rates. I think it's actually unhealthy in the long run for us to keep interest rates this low. So no, I don't think this is the Federal Reserve's fault, and I think the Federal Reserve ought to be cautious about lowering rates more when they're really not the cause of the problem, and they can't solve the problem either.
David Kelly, if the U.S. does go into another recession soon or in the near future, could it be as big as the last one?
No, I don't think it could. I think it's much more likely to be a recession of the size of the recession that we saw in 1990 or perhaps in 2000. The last recession was truly extraordinary because it was a global financial crisis. And we don't have those kinds of imbalances in the U.S. economy right now. We don't have a fragile financial system. So overall, if we did have a recession, I would expect it to be relatively mild and relatively short.
That is David Kelly, Chief Global Strategist at J.P. Morgan Asset Management. Thanks so much for joining us.
Anytime.
Well, staying with the economy, 11 states and Washington, D.C. have legalized recreational marijuana, which has helped push cannabis into the mainstream, which has companies racing to patent products ranging from new strains of marijuana plants to new ways of extracting THC, the chemical responsible for pot's psychological effects. But because marijuana producers have lived in the shadows for so long, how they compete with each other may not be clear or fair. Ali Budner from member station KRCC reports. It's not every day you get a true eureka moment in science.
We always tell people to keep an eye out for something unique, something different.
That's Andrew Alfred. He's chief scientist at the Denver-based cannabis company LiveWell. They grow marijuana for dispensaries in Colorado and Oregon. And one particular day,
we had someone come into our office and say, hey, I got something that I haven't seen before. You want to come take a look at this?
He says what they found was eureka-worthy indeed. Alfred was growing a cannabis plant through an asexual breeding process called tissue culture, sort of like cloning. But the cloned plant was behaving differently from its mother plant. It was healthier and hardier and altogether new. So they hired a patent lawyer. They worked on their application for more than a year, taking meticulous measurements and notes and describing their new plant in detail.
It was graded and evaluated purely on the merits of how well I described a plant, just as if it were a rose.
And yes, he does see the paradox here, a federal agency issuing patents for something that's still illegal under federal law. But he says the reviewers didn't care about that, and he got the patent. While plant patents for cannabis plants are still very rare, patenting in general for the cannabis industry isn't exactly new. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office started handing out patents for marijuana-related products decades ago, even before a growing number of states started passing medical marijuana laws.
So I think the race is on.
That's Jeremy Kaptein. He's a patent attorney focusing on marijuana law. He says the number of awarded cannabis patents has picked up remarkably since Colorado and Washington legalized the plant for recreational use. And he's happy about the shift. He says it's one way of normalizing this emerging industry. But
there's going to be winners and losers, and it's not a merit-based system. It's whoever's first and has the most money.
In other words, capitalism in action.
I think we did have a sense that the cannabis industry isn't going to be like other industries.
Beth Schechter helped create an archive of marijuana plants for the now defunct nonprofit Open Cannabis Project.
And we're all having a really big wake-up call that that's not the case. The cannabis industry is becoming very corporate very quickly.
By documenting strains of existing cannabis plants and making them available to the public, she tried to prevent patents that would step on the toes of what others had already been doing. Schechter says there are different types of patents, some more threatening than others. She's not quite as worried about narrow plant patents like the one Andrew Alfred got for LiveWell. She's more concerned about something called utility patents, because they can be wider in scope. It could be a patent for a process, a piece of equipment, or even a plant's DNA. Still, she does see a way for companies to patent ethically, and that's to make them appropriately narrow.
Don't try and go and get a patent that's so broad that now nobody else can breed something with THCV in it. Like, don't do that.
These systems you see behind you are supercritical extractors. Normally when
Jim Parco shows me around his cannabis extraction company, Purple Bees, based in Pueblo, Colorado. We walk through a sea of stainless steel machines inside a giant warehouse room.
I'll walk you through and kind of explain the components and how they work.
He says his issue is that someone could easily run to the patent office with a process or product that he's been using for years.
Does that preclude us from using it? I don't know. But it's the 5 magic words. Tell it to the judge.
He also has no idea if anything he's currently doing is patentable.
Am I unique? I was one of the first ones to do all of this. Am I still unique? Probably not.
So in a sense, he may have already lost out. On the other hand, he says, patenting just isn't his MO. He says the industry started out with an open source collaborative ethic, and he'd rather keep it that way. Plus, he says in the world of marijuana, you get used to risk.
If the DEA wanted to drive into my yard, take a battering ram, bust down our doors, arrest all of our employees, and confiscate all of this equipment, there's not a damn thing I can do.
So does he lose sleep worrying about patents? No, he just can't be bothered. For Here and Now, I'm Ellie Budner.
And Allie's story comes to us from the Mountain West News Bureau.
And speaking of the Mountain West, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper has announced he is no longer running for president and will give serious thought to running for Senate in Colorado. Meanwhile, Beto O'Rourke is resetting his campaign today after not gaining much traction in the polls. He says he's not going to abandon his campaign to run for Senate in Texas, but he's not going to spend much time in the early primary states either.
Someone asked if I was going to be heading back to the state fair. Corn dogs and Ferris wheels. And I said, no, I can't go back for that. But I also cannot go back to that. The kind of challenges that we face in this country at this moment of crisis require an urgency. Unless we want to reap the consequences of failing to meet them. Consequences that we lived and I hope learned from in El Paso on August 3rd. And so, to those places where Donald Trump has been terrorizing and terrifying and demeaning our fellow Americans, that's where you will find me in this campaign.
Beto O'Rourke speaking today in El Paso, Texas. You're listening to Here and Now.
A few years ago, an Austrian daughter asked to visit a friend. She promised to be back by 3 p.m. She was in Syria living under ISIS. We follow that mother's journey to get her daughter and grandson back. This afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
All Things Considered airs from 4 to 6:30 on WHYY. I'm Susan Levy. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel is open to all visitors and all criticism, but will bar entry to 2 U.S. Democratic congresswomen over their support for boycotts. Netanyahu's office says that based on Representatives Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar's itinerary for an upcoming visit to the West Bank and Jerusalem, it became clear that they're planning a trip whose sole purpose was strengthening the boycott and negating the legitimacy of Israel. Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner says these suspected gunmen in yesterday's hours-long standoff that left 6 people, 6 police wounded, should not have been in the streets. Krasner says the gunman has not yet been charged. U.S. industrial production fell 0.2% in July as factory activity slumped in a worrisome sign for the economy. You're listening to At 1:19, this is WHYY. Today on The Why, a Pennsylvania man is suing the Boy Scouts of America, alleging his assistant scout leader sexually abused him back in the 1970s. Why could his case and others go forward despite the statute of limitations? It's tonight on The Why at 5:45 here on 90.9 WHYY.